loving those specs.
Thank you. I'm officially old. I officially need readers.
It happens to all of us.
Yeah. Although all my life I've worn fake glasses because I love the look of glasses. And so now I can actually say I'm wearing them for a reason. And I'm not just pretending, I'm not just faking it.
Yeah, they're the ultimate intellectual prop. It worked really well for Stallone in Tango and Cash, who wore specs throughout that entire movie. And he looks great. Yeah, those are great specs.
Working in restaurants and, people wanted to see you as a hot piece of tail.
Yeah, right.
And suddenly they give you a little bit more respect.
If only I knew that trick back then, I would have.
Would have saved you so much harassment, right?
I know, right? Yeah, exactly. Well, if only I could recast those moments and live them again. Yeah. That's the story of my life. They really suit you though, mate. You might not get this reference. They really look great. They have you ever heard of the TV shows Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet? Do they mean anything to you? Right. So basically, have you ever seen that movie Team America World Police?
No.
With the puppets. Okay, so that's a satire of what I'm about to talk about. There are these famous science fiction shows produced in England with American actors that were made in the 60s and 70s, Day-Glow Technicolor, but puppets, not real people. And they were puppets with like special effects to science fiction, different kind of science fiction shows. And whenever a character in those shows wore spectacles, they looked exactly like that. There's a famous character in Thunderbirds who creates all the technology called Brains, and they look like Brains' glasses. So if you check out Brains from Thunderbirds, and anybody who's a puppet show nerd listening to this will get my reference. But
then from now on, you should just start calling me Brains. I think that's official. I am officially now Brains.
I like that, and I'm going to adopt that throughout this episode, and we'll see we'll see how it goes. Greetings, by the way. Sorry, carry on.
Okay. Oh, I was just going to say, speaking of Brains, I haven't gotten to it yet, but your beautiful recommendation arrived.
Fantastic. Oh, yeah, I love that. So for those of you listening, Evangeline is holding up The Little World of Don Camillo, The Little World of Don Camillo by Giovanni Guareschi, one of my all-time favorite collections of short stories. Beautiful tales of life in post-war Italy, funny and heartwarming and real. And I'm really looking forward to hearing you tell me what you think. And if you
recommended it to me last Library of the Soul episode.
Yeah,
right. I got it in the mail, and I'm recommending books for him to read, and so tit for tat, I got to read what he recommended for me.
Brilliant. I love it. Thank you, mate, and welcome indeed to Hard Degree presents Evangeline Lilly's Library of the Soul, which this week. I'm coming at you from a different place because I'm up in the land of my birth. I'm up in Merseyside, where I'm helping my mum and dad, or facilitating my mum and dad doing their downsizing. So hence the boxes that you can see on the video link here. So I'm up
on the saga goes.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I'm in my sister's old bedroom at the moment, and the reason the lighting is different on me to normal because I've got my laptop set up by a window, and as I'm talking to you, it's really quite amazing. I can see all these robins. There's a robin's nest just outside of it. They're all just flying around merrily as the sun goes down. So this is the perfect environment to be having this conversation about our first book that we're going to discuss, which is The Final Quest by Rick Joyner, also collected as The Vision by Rick Joyner, which I think that I've only read The Final Quest, but I think if I'm right, I think The Vision also collects the next book, which is called The Call. Is that right, Evangeline?
Yeah, so there's the Final Quest and The Call are basically two parts of the same vision that this man believes he received from God, and sat and wrote it down. Took the time to sit and write in as much detail as he possibly could what he was seeing in this vision. And I read it when I was in my early 20s, and I just read it again now. So 20 years later.
Yeah.
And I was curious to see if over the 20 years of so much evolution in my faith and my life and, you know, my journey, if I would still resonate with the book, or if I would sort of think it was hokey. You know, I was like, oh, it's probably going to be a bit embarrassing when I reread it. And I still, rereading it now, I still felt like I wholeheartedly believe that this man was receiving from, you know, from a higher power, from source, from God, from whatever is that voice inside of us that can guide and lead us. And it feels so inspired. And I still got so much out of the read the second time. And also found it really interesting to see how far, you know, my journey had come. Like it resonated in a completely different way than it did when I was 21.
Yeah. There are so many things when I read it that really formed questions that I wanted to ask you. And just to recap on the concept here for everybody who's listening. So Evangeline Lilly's Library of the Soul is one book a week for 5 weeks that Evangeline, aka Brains, which is how she's now going to be referred to. So Brains has been reading these at key points during the course of her life. And really this is an exercise in looking at when those books were originally read, seeing what the impact was at the time on your life, rereading now, seeing what the impact is now. And at the end of this episode, we'll get into next week's book. But this first book is indeed The Final Quest by Rick Joyner. And the first thing I wanted to ask you was, can you talk a lot about your life when you first encountered this book, what the circumstances actually were, and how you came to read it?
Well, I'll start with the first question because it's easier to answer. The how I came to read it is a harder one. I think I was probably 21. And when I graduated high school, I went on a short-term missions trip. I was very Christian. I was very evangelical Christian at that point in my life. And I went on a short-term missions trip to the Philippines, and I came back completely on fire about it. This is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I'm going to be a missionary. That's it. Like, I'm in, I'm done. You know, like some people feel when they enter the profession of acting, like, this is it for me. That was me with missionary work. And I was offered a full-time position in the jungles of Palawan, which at the time was not a resort destination. Wow. It was a completely remote, almost uninhabited island of mostly tribes who were living in the jungles in grass huts and very much off the land. And so I was offered this 2-year term there as the nurse and the teacher for the tribe that I had visited. And I was dedicated and devoted and ready to go. And I was 18 years old. Yeah. And I was this close to going when the people who were in charge of it, who were sending me out there, found out that my parents had no idea I had these plans. So they basically told me, if your parents don't give you permission, you're a minor, you're not going. And so I went and addressed it with my parents and said, you know, this is what I want to do. It's done. Like, I have the position, I've done the fundraising, I'm ready to go. And my parents were like, there's no way in hell you're going by yourself to the jungles of the Philippines for 2 years where we can't reach you. At that point in time, I didn't have a cell phone. I mean, I don't think very many people had a cell phone. Yeah. And even if I did, I don't think it would have worked, in the jungles of Palawan at the time. And that was this enormous blow of, I thought I knew my purpose. I thought I was ready, and I was off to do it. And after a hugely tear-filled argument with my parents for hours and hours and hours, they refused to relent. And so I spent I want to say about 3 years just really drifting. I think if anyone else is listening is a big fan of mine, they've probably heard about all these odd jobs that I had when I was young and how they were so varied and different. And I had so many of them. I was a grease monkey. I was a flight attendant. I was a still model at a college. I was a waitress, a bartender. I did all kinds of crazy stuff. Well, not crazy, but just different things.
Yeah, just to interject for a second about that. I've meant to say this to you before, but that part of your story, you know who it really reminds me of? And it might not be the person that people immediately make a causal link between you and the other performer I'm about to talk about.
Oh, I know. It's Brains.
That's all right. It's brains from Thunderbirds. I'm glad you got it. You read my mind.
I am brains.
Yeah, you are brains. Yeah, exactly. In fact, it's your story. Your early story has always reminded me a lot of Robert Mitchum, which is one of the is a great performer, a person with a movie career with a great deal of impact, but he had an equally fascinating life, doing a variety of things that gave him a bunch of experiences. And I was thinking you should check it out, because when I was reading your story, I thought, man, this is Mitchum-esque. And of course, on a surface level, if somebody said, name one person that you know that really reminds you of Robert Mitchum, it wouldn't be Brains Lilly.
No, it wouldn't. No, definitely not. Oh, cool. I will definitely check it out.
Yeah.
I always find it, I feel like there are very few actors who don't have a story. There's a reason why you choose to not be yourself for a living. I mean, it's a very bizarre, kind of almost neurotic thing to choose to do. And that was kind of what I did during that time also. I mean, in a way, that was the beginning of my acting career, because as I went from job to job and thing to thing, I did feel so lost that I just kept, no pun intended.
Yeah, very good. I wondered if you were going to skip past that. I thought, what are you? That was very good. Well held.
No, it's good. But I think I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I wanted to be. And I was young enough that was okay. I was young enough that it didn't feel like a crisis. It just felt like an exploration. Like, okay, well, if I can't do that, that felt like a crisis. When I actually, at that time, when my parents said no, I prayed about it, of course. And I wanted to be a missionary. And I, in my prayer, the response that I got very clearly back, and I've always had a two-way dialogue in that space. And I got a very clear response back, which was that until you learn to minister to the people closest to you, you can't be expected to be effective at all with other people far, far away across the world.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that really hurt, because I knew it was true. I knew that my heart was always sort of out there, and that I had very little time and space for what was in here. My immediate family, I had very little time or space for friends. Even in high school, I was like, I had very little social life. I was pretty preoccupied with creative things, and I would write poetry and read books, and so I knew it was true. I felt really convicted by that, but it wasn't something I'd necessarily at 18 knew how to fix, or like what to do about. So yeah, I just drifted, and everywhere I went, everything I did, I sort of thought, okay, well, I'll try something new here. I'll become, a very meek, shy wallflower here. And then over here, I'll just be this gregarious, outgoing, sporty girl. And then over, and I just try on different things, because why not? I'm, 20, and like, what else is there to do? And it was after that kind of journey that I hit a kind of bottom, where none of that had satisfied. Nothing felt like a resonation. Like, it didn't feel like, oh, now this is me, like, or, oh, this is what I want to be doing. It still felt like I had lost this moment, this chance to step into myself. And I don't know what prompted it, but I decided to fast. And I did a 3-day fast. And so 3 days of watered down orange juice, and that was it. And I'm hypoglycemic, so like,
wow, okay.
I look like Christ on the cross by the end of those 3 days. I was
sure you
just
did.
emaciated. It was not attractive. My underwear were literally falling off of me. But during that, I got another very, very clear message, which was, you have to come to me daily. Before your day starts, before the world wakes up, start with me, or us, or this, the all. Start here. And I was probably about 21, and it was like, action was so much easier than stillness.
Yeah, of course.
So much easier. And I committed with all my heart. That's what I'm going to do. But when I look back, I can see that I very much did not do that. And that was around the time that this book came. And so it was in this sort of low place of seeking of feeling very lost and like I'd searched, there had been a real genuine effort to search, and the search had come up what felt to me almost like dry. Yeah. Even though I can in hindsight look back and no, you got exactly the direction you needed for your life, which is that my spiritual life is central to who I am. And if I don't start there, I will never find my path. Like I won't be in the space I want to be in.
Yeah.
And then I read this book. Called The Final Quest. And it was so much more exciting than just sit around and talk to God, because there was so much action in it. There was, this battle, this epic battle, and I could fight on the side of good and fight against evil. And it really called to the evangelist in me, like climb back down that mountain and go and help people and like lift them into spiritual enlightenment. And it was like, yes, the missionary in me was like, yes, this is what my calling is. This is what I want to do.
Now I really feel it when you say that, because here's my kind of, I guess, Cliff Notes interjection into what you just said. Yeah. Is that what I was really grasped by with this is what an incredible widescreen and cinematic piece of work it is. So just to digress for a second, as you know, as we've talked about in the past, I come from sort of generations of church rejecting, Anglo-Irish Liverpudlian people who came over from Ireland generations ago, had dealt with persecution, had rejected the church, and then at the turn of the last century, had embraced socialism. So the church wasn't part of my upbringing. If I had a church, it was either Probe Records in Liverpool, or it was the Futurist Cinema in Liverpool, which is the local grindhouse cinema, and so reading this book for me was a very interesting process, because there was a degree of internal cynicism going on when I read it. Yeah. But the reason, what really grabbed me straight away, and what exists throughout the book, and the reason I'm pulling this bit out, is it has this incredible widescreen cinematic Tolkien-esque battle feel to it, which funnily enough has this parallel with so many of the artistic portrayals you've been involved with later in your life. Because I was reading this going, man, this is very Peter Jackson, The Hobbit, isn't it? The way it all comes together.
And Avengers Endgame.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, if you have Thanos Endgame, if you have Thor and Oakenshield and The Hobbit, and you've got God popping up in the middle of it, and Satan, that's this book, and it really has an incredibly propulsive energy to it. Because I really thought I was going to read it and think, well, this is clearly a load of entertaining horseshit. Yeah, but it absolutely wasn't how I responded to it, and so just to put you back into a narrative about talking about that, how quickly did the book, in terms of your response to what you were reading, how quickly did it assert that power? Is it something you got 50% of the way through and you thought, oh man, this is really working for me, or was it immediate kinetic response?
Instantly.
Yeah.
I mean, instantly, I remember, it's actually interesting because as I reread it now, I realized that really what made the largest impression on me at that time was the hordes of hell are marching.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
The first chapter, and it starts out, the demonic army was so large that it stretched as far as the eye could see. It was separated into divisions, with each carrying a different banner. The foremost divisions marched under the banners of pride, self-righteousness, respectability, selfish ambition, unrighteous judgment, and jealousy. And I was like, holy shit. I was just I was just in.
Yeah.
And I found actually rereading it that it was the opposite, that I found myself at the beginning, similar to you, sort of wondering if I might find it now a bit reductive.
Yeah.
And maybe restricting in the doctrine. But what happened was I read it and I sort of felt like, well, I mean, those are definitely things that are rampant right now. And these are things we can't deny about our culture.
Yeah.
And that's very, very interesting and prescient, because he was writing this in the 1990s, and it's only, I think much more magnified now.
Yeah.
But as the book went on, as it got into the deeper later chapters, in fact, I think the last 2 or 3 chapters, now those were the ones that really resonated with me in a much more powerful way. And I think it was because he sort of stepped out of this paradigm of battle, this paradigm of war, this idea that God is at war, which for me now is the antithesis of my belief in God.
Yeah.
My current belief in a higher power, a source, a creator, a creative energy that is really like, at work in this space that we call Earth, that is the antithesis of God in my mind, is war. And so I think, as a young person, you want a cause. You want to like grab on.
You want to break it up. You want to smash it up. You want to take down the old order. You want to rebel. You want to smoke cigarettes, drink, take drugs, go to gigs, whatever it is. All that stuff.
Or my fight for God.
Yeah, fight for God. Yeah, that other cool stuff. The fight for God, cool stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was my rebellion in a way. Like I remember my dad
I get it.
Shit when I was young about it, like because I was so zealous. I was extremely zealous. But it just, it's something I think that is good though, and beautiful and natural and right in young people. And I think it's also good and beautiful and natural and right that we do kind of evolve out of it and grow out of it into a place of what would be called wisdom and more humility. And I think my children, becoming a mother, has kicked my ass so hard that I now am in a space where I could hear the messages that came later in the book.
Yeah.
That are much more about vulnerability and humility and are less steeped in the doctrine of bureaucracy and violence and war, which, even though I very much believe that this book is inspired, I also believe that there is no way you can get yourself out of the way. There just isn't. And I think that Rick Joyner in this case, even though in the book it specifically calls people out for like projecting their own ideas of humanity onto God, I feel like that he's a little bit guilty of that.
He is 100% guilty of that. There's no two ways about it. But I think you've opened the door on an interesting sub-conversation, I think, which is Joyner himself as a human being is clearly a ragingly imperfect person. Yeah,
right.
and there's many things he believes and has done and has stated that I don't agree with, and there's many things that his own family he has done and they don't agree with it. Many political beliefs he has, but I think my sense is, and again, some of my initial cynicism came from the fact that I'd having researched the subject, like any journalist would do. I was like, yeah, okay, I wonder what I'm actually going to get here.
Yeah, that's great. I got to read this. Thanks, Evangeline.
Thanks, Brains. I've got to read a Trumpian dystopian Christian novel. Excellent. Yeah.
You waste an entire evening of my life.
I know, yeah, absolutely. I have to read it, and it's like getting your homework. I have to read this fucking thing, right? I've got to read it. But in fact, my experience was much more, which I talked about a second ago. It's much more like reading. I would liken it to reading another book I really didn't want to read and had to years ago, but I've now read multiple times, would be Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, right? I love that novel for its searing, melodramatic portrayal of human emotion in a way that if you've ever been in love or in a relationship that was bad for you, but you were really addicted to, that everybody would recognize. Yeah. And I didn't want to read that book. I really didn't want to do it. I did it for my A-levels in high school, but I read it and I was completely captivated by it and have remained so ever since. Yeah. And I think really that the power of what to achieve with the final quest as an experience, and speaks to you spiritually, is that it transcends the person who wrote it, and therefore the flaws that you're talking about and the things that they're guilty of in putting it together they didn't quite get right. I think it still remains quite powerful and an interesting journey to go on, despite the fact that is the case.
I'm fascinated that you found that to be true also, because that's what I found. And And
I'm programmed not to feel that way, by the way.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that, as you know, was one of the reasons I was most excited to do this with you, because I love, varying perspectives intersecting on the same matter. And I think discourse is a skill that has been completely lost. That discourse is an essential skill to a healthy society. And I love speaking to somebody who has a different perspective or comes into something with a different background about something I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
Because when you're passionate about something, you may be able to see the flaws in it, but likely you're not seeing the full picture. You just have blinders somewhere. And then, somebody can come in and just open your heart and mind in a way that it was never open before. And so I love that you came into it from a completely different space. And I'm fascinated that you still did receive something or kind of had an experience with it that was beneficial or pleasant or, in some way positive.
Well, I'm going to strike an analogy that perhaps it's firmly rooted in the nerd space, and I'm not sure there are a lot of people who've talked about this book that have struck this analogy, because the thing I'm going to strike the analogy with is the polar opposite of this. But for me, it's very similar to reading the famous graphic novel series by Frank Miller, written and drawn by Frank Miller, called Sin City. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Sin City is a beautifully produced piece of work, which is a kind of film noir, hard-boiled novel pastiche of a city in which extreme crime goes down. And the artwork they've made 2 successful movies out of it, which are both very faithful to the source material. And the first one is actually a great film, I think. It's born again noir, and Willis is in it, and
I love
it's an amazing film, and it's a very accurate representation of the novel. But the novel is more, the graphic novel is more at source. So some of Frank Miller's extremely kind of Republican sensibilities seep into the work. Now, he might take issue with the word Republican, but he's definitely somebody who has a particular set of views that you would traditionally think were on the kind of the right of the compass, right? But and so he's not somebody that when I read what he thinks about stuff, where I sit there going, oh yeah, man, Frank, you're preaching to the choir here, brother. I believe what you're saying. That's not the case. After what he thinks, and go, man, that's just completely wrong. It's just not the way I see the world. But the book has an incredible, hugely passionate energy to it. And as an exercise, my very left-wing son read it recently and thoroughly enjoyed it, and just consumed all of the collected editions very quickly. And it seems to me that actually one of the things that Sin City shares with the Final Quest is just that amazing immersive energy where, even though I think the Final Quest it's very heavy-handed and it's very didactic, and sometimes, fairly frequently, the author has these kind of tells in his writing where you're like, oh man, I can see who you are, when you're writing this. I think the beauty of it is I know all of those things, but I still enjoyed it. Right. Yeah, and that to me, that's the benchmark of kind of a really effective, if not great, really effective piece of work. And that's why I enjoyed it so much, because knowing that and having researched the guy, knowing who he was and seeing what he was doing, I was still lost in it, and I still started it and read the whole thing in one sitting in a kind of almost fever dream of absorbing all these Christian images and this kind of thinking about human beings' place in the world with God and God's relationship with human beings, and that again, that widescreen cinematic element of it, I found that very, very powerful. And I think that speaks to the power of the work itself, if that makes sense.
It's interesting, because I was going to ask you what you think that is attributed to, because as you were speaking, thoughts kept popping up in my mind. One of the thoughts was how interesting it is that, like, when you said, you can hear somebody, I do not agree with that at all. And I thought, I just had a reflection on my own, my own stance on things. I'm extremely opinionated, and yet I don't know that I ever hear things that I just think are wrong. Like I for some reason, find myself hearing the truth within every lie, if that makes sense.
I do get that.
You know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
And when you were saying that, I was thinking, because despite the vessel it came through, there's truth in there.
Correct.
And that's why I was curious if you would just see it as like great writing, and that's why it so came to you in a way that you just devoured it, or if it was because there was some truth in there despite his flaws, despite who wrote it.
So I don't think, I think one of the things the book isn't is well written. I don't think it's well written at all. And I think there's almost no stylistic brilliance to it whatsoever, which is very different to Sin City, which stylistically is brilliant. Yeah, it's got no writing experience attached to it. What it is pure undiluted energy. And the fact that it genuinely is pure undiluted energy, to the trained or the untrained eye, that's what you can feel. And I would say that this is a novel that really speaks to your feelings rather than your intellect and your evaluative capability. And that's the ride it takes you on. So it is like literally being strapped into a roller coaster, maybe after you've had a few cocktails, and and the roller coaster starts when you're in mid conversation and you haven't even noticed that's where your friend's taking you. He goes, by the way, what is this? Oh, it's Space Mountain. Have you ever been on this before? No, what is it? And there's the kind of boom, and then it starts. It's like that, and that's what starting this book is like. And that's what reading this book is like. I didn't walk away from it going, man, that was so well written. I thought it was very poorly written, actually. Maybe I'm being a bit extreme, but it's certainly not well written. But what it has,
even the intention, right?
No, that's right. I don't think that's right, because I don't think he wrote it going, by the way, this is a showcase for my writing ability and what a great thinker I am. I think it's come from another place. I mean, it's almost like we haven't talked about this, but one of the many things I've done in my life is I went on the Alpha course once, because I wanted to find you might not know, maybe the Alpha course. Do you have that in the US? The Alpha course is a course that's run by basically evangelical Christians here in the UK, and basically it's designed to be, I guess it's kind of a hip, trendy way of orienting yourself into Christianity if you feel pulled by Christianity. So it's a 10-week course where you learn about the basic precepts of Christianity, and you're exposed to God, to Jesus. Then you go away for a spirit weekend where you open yourself up with, the Spirit of the Lord visits you. And I went out with a lady who's an evangelical Christian, funnily enough, given my beliefs, kind of by accident. It sounds like Withnail and I, where it's like we went on holiday by accident, but I sort of ended up dating this lady by accident. When I started dating her, I didn't know she was an evangelical Christian. And I went on the Alpha course. My point is this, is that I did the whole thing properly. I asked the questions. I talked to everybody. I went on the spirit weekend. I won't go into that because it's a whole long story. It's pretty funny, I think, but it's a whole different thing.
A great story.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about it some other time. It'll chew through more than an hour. But the outcome was, I came away from that thinking, Christianity is a load of horseshit. I just don't buy into it at all. I don't believe one red cent of this entire belief system. I think it's wrong. But, and then I realized, well, why am I the only person who went on it who reacted that way? And that's because it's a course that is designed for people who are predisposed to faith. They're sitting there thinking, do you know what? I really feel God speaking to me, but I'm not really sure what it is that I'm feeling. And they go on this course, and by the end of it, they're like, man, I'm seeing that God stuff. Now I know what he's saying to me. And I was the only person out of maybe 70 people who had the reaction I had. Everybody else came out of it like a confirmed Christian. But the interesting thing about that process is I wasn't treated like a pariah, because as I'm being with you, I was very honest about what I felt. Right. But what I kind of respect about people of hardcore Christian faith is that I said, I think this is a load of horseshit, pure unalloyed horseshit. I think you're all actually, it's just excitement that's taking you over, and you're feeling something that's not there. Because I'm pretty attuned to the universe, I think, well, I can't feel any of this, And everybody was like, That's so interesting. Could I bring my pastor over to speak to you? And I just had a queue of like vicars and whatnot coming up going, tell me what this is, tell me what you think. And they all wanted to listen to it. And I was very moved by that. And it did fundamentally change my relationship with Christianity, because rather than embracing my grandmother's utter fear of it, or detestation of it would be a better way. Now, some of my best friends are evangelical Christians. Some of my best friends are Mormons, and I found their belief systems fascinating. I absolutely do not agree with them, but I find them interesting. And I think what I'm getting out of this book, to return to that from that digression, is exactly this. It's the power of his belief. And something I wanted to ask you about was some of the things that spoke to me when I was reading the book, and how you actually felt about it. And the thing I'm thinking of particularly is, I love the way he lays out the architecture of visions, which is something I'd never thought about before, that there are different levels on which you receive visions, whether they're impressions, there are conscious visions, there are dream visions, there are trance visions. And what your experience has been with any of those, because it's something I'd never thought about, but I found fascinating.
Well, before I launch into that, I just want to say that what you were talking about before was one of the things that I very much noticed about this book, which is that, one, Christianity is very, very, the negative word would be manipulative, emotionally manipulative. Yeah. The positive word might be connects to emotion, right? It's very dependent upon emotion. It really draws, the metaphors that are used in the Christian faith are metaphors that cannot not spark an emotional reaction in most people. When you talk about father and son relationship, Abba Daddy is the way I was introduced to God. He's your Abba Daddy.
Interesting.
And I had a very difficult relationship with my father growing up, and all I ever wanted was this perfect, gentle daddy. And there it is. Here you are. And I also think it was interesting what you said about some people being predisposed to faith, because I've had this question my whole life of, why me? Why do I have visions, have dreams? Why do I see God in everything? Why do I have a two-way communication with something I can't see? Why don't my sisters? Where did that come from? Like, who decides when they put you in a box and send you into the womb? Like, who gets this predisposition towards faith and who doesn't? And is that just because of how we're raised? But I feel like, I don't know, because you were raised, the way you were raised, which maybe has, you were raised without faith, and maybe that has done that for you. I was raised with faith, but so are my sisters, and they have faith, but not like, they don't have the sort of intensity of spiritual connection that I have. And now I just lost my train of thought, because I went to the trance and the dreams and everything.
Yeah, sorry. You know what I realized, and this is something that I think is worth discussing. I'm so focused in the conversations I have with people normally, particularly in this kind of forum, that I want to make sure, because not everybody is as naturally chatty as you are and as thoughtful as you are, right? So basically, not everybody makes the transition from when you make a declarative statement to what you're going to talk about next. So my thing is, I'm always going blah, 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 and I want to ease into the next comment. But with you, I don't need to do that. What I should have done is I should have made the definitive statement, parked it, see what you had to say, and then come in with the segue into the trance thing.
I will always have something to say.
I know. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, I have to warn journalists when they're interviewing me, and they'll be like, okay, we're going to do a really rapid thing. And I'm like, well, see, the thing is, I'm very verbose. Yeah. You're not going to get rapid out of me in an interview. It's just not going to happen.
So I've derailed you through my artifice and technique.
I just remembered. I know what it was. So it really harkens to where I have come to in my relationship with the church, which you said something about your grandmother being very, like, detesting it, right? Like,
yes,
very,
absolutely, yeah.
And I dated a Mancunian who was like that. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
I find that in general, English people tend to be very infuriated by the church.
I remember this is one of the first things that you said to me the first time we met. And I thought, well, that's an interesting and yet, you know, extremely accurate view, not just of English people, but of English people from the Northwest. Because that is really a thing. Sorry.
Well, I think a lot of them, no, please interject. I think a lot of them were raised in these very strict Catholic schools where you have somebody who's saying God loves you, who's strapping you with a wooden ruler.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And
absolutely
so
right.
There's this connection with violence and judgment and anger and, you know, and it's just rejected outright, understandably. There's such a repulsion to something saying, I love you, but I'm going to beat you now. You know, that just doesn't fly. You know, in people's emotions, they know there's something amiss there. So if there's something amiss there must be something amiss with the whole faith in God and the whole idea, right?
Yeah.
But I have the opposite. You know, my experience was that, you know, probably the safest, gentlest place in my world was the church. And it was a place where, you know, I felt like everybody was always very nice. Everybody was always very polite. Everybody was always very gentle and sweet. And there was almost like a saccharine nature, you know, to the, right? Like everybody's just so nice to you. And as a little girl, I loved that. I mean, as an adult woman, I find it a little bit grating, but as a little girl, it was like, oh, I can just relax and be safe here. And I think that where I am at now in my faith is like, I don't have any resentment despite so many of the destructive and painful ways in which the church in general I have pain. I have, you know, this residual idea of guilt and sacrifice and martyrdom and things that don't serve me, things that I'm like trying to get out of my spiritual system. Like I'm really trying to exercise them, but it's really hard when they've been instilled when you're so young. But I don't feel mad or angry or resentful about that. What I feel is that it's, and there's so many people who are going to eat me alive for using this term, and I don't mean it in a reductive way, but for me, it was like spiritual preschool. It's like somebody has to introduce you to some very simple ideas and make them so clear and so irrefutable that you cannot argue with them. You can't deny them. They are true. There's no, and that way you can sort of relax into believing. Instead of having the constant question of, is this true? Is this true? Should I believe this? Or should, when it's like everyone around you is saying, yes, it is. There's no question about it. This is irrefutable truth. Great. Okay. You can relax and you can believe. Yeah. And once my heart was open to believe, now I feel the world is my oyster. You know, like faith is not something inaccessible to me. And so I can go sort of anywhere in the world. I can visit a mosque. I can visit a temple. I can go to the forest. I can sit down and meditate. I can access faith with ease, and it just feels so natural and comfortable and comforting. And I really credit that to being raised in the church, and it has become the foundation of who I am. It's always really been the core of who I am, and I'm really grateful for that. And so I just have like zero, I mean, I get it. I understand. I've had, I mean, I could tell you stories of ways that I was not served well by the church, you know. But I ultimately have such a good place for it. For any, and I think I've said this to you before also, but for anything that makes space for things unseen. Because our world is so obsessively focused on commerce and materialism and image and things that are so temporal that, like, it's really hard, it's becoming harder and harder to find anyone who says, I'm going to physically occupy a space so that others can come and put all that aside and just be with themselves and connect in with what's really important and, you know, what is really the truth of what we're living. And for me, I have so much respect for any faith, any space for spirit, right? For things unseen.
And that's definitely a place that where we totally agree. Hard agree, if you will, because hard agree, right? Because I've come to that place. What really fascinates me is I've come to exactly that that place from a very different origin and through a very different route. And yet what you've done is very neatly describe where you are. That's kind of where I am with it all. And I think people's belief systems are fascinating things. And to hear people talk with passion about the things that give life meaning to them and give life a richness and, you know, kind of day glow, indelible kind of enjoyment. I mean, I think that's amazing. You know what I mean? Whether that's, you know, hey man, I really love drinking, or I really love getting fucked up and taking hallucinogenics. That's my church. Or it's, you know, I'm a devout Muslim, or it's you know, into Shinto. It's like I think it's everybody's story is so fascinating, and you know, faith in itself is something that you can't. I grew up around an absolute ton of atheists and agnostics, and the reality is that you can't. While church and state should always be separate, when it comes in terms of governance, when it comes to understanding human beings, you just can't discount the power of faith and religious belief, whatever that religion may be, whatever that attachment may be, because it has had a profound effect on human history and has a profound effect on the decisions that most people take every day of their lives. Yeah,
and it's in no way about what's going to happen after I die. I don't give a shit. No. I mean, really, to me, it's like, I don't actually think that's what the benefit is. For me, I've always said, look, I could die and be eaten by worms, and that's it. It's the end. I could die and I could become a ladybug. I don't know what's going to happen. But right now, here in this moment, this gives me joy.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all it's about. Like, who cares about the rest? Really, it's like, this is what gives my life a sense of meaning and purpose. And if it does anything positive for me, then it's a win already. Heaven or hell isn't the issue. You know, that's not really even the point. And it also gives me an incredible groundedness, like what you were asking about before with spiritual experiences of, you know, visions and whatnot. I've had some of the most intense experiences of my life, and I've had some pretty intense experiences in my life. Namely, my mind goes straight to, I just last night watched the Billie Eilish documentary on Apple TV.
Yeah, that's a great piece of work. It's brilliant.
It's great, and for me, even though, you know, I in no way want to compare my life journey to what Billie Eilish just went through, but when Lost first launched to international success, it was a very intense moment of my life. And I watched her, and I just felt like I could relate to so many of the emotions I was sort of watching her go through, and vicariously slipping back into my 24-year-old self going, wow, I remember, you know, so many of those feelings. But despite some of the more intense experiences I've had in my life, the ones where I have tapped into the power of faith have been the most intense. And I have, you know, I've had experiences where I dream a lot. Like, my dreams are often the ways in which I feel spoken to or led or guided. And I do very clearly hear guidance. I don't think that it's like, you know, there's no loudspeaker with God going, Evangeline, right? You know, there's impressions, and, you know, and those impressions are the best way I can describe them as a communication, you know, and those impressions, like, I've come to understand at a very young age. I understood there was a difference between the impressions of my thoughts and the impressions of something else, something that was like outside of me. And I can remember, you know, when I was young and that first started happening, I had very intense experiences. I could meet a stranger and know things about them that I shouldn't know. And I could speak into their life, and they would look at me like I was from the moon, because I'd never met them before, but I would know things about them. I had experiences with healing, you know, where, you know, praying over people and literally having them heal from really intense injuries. And I was so young when I realized that faith literally can move mountains, and that it isn't really about which faith, is where I came to eventually. It's about faith. Yeah. But what's interesting is, now that I went through a period of existential crisis when I first realized that maybe Christianity wasn't the irrefutable end word on God. And that was really, really painful for me, because I had to break from the purity of faith that I had. And ever since then, I've never come back to that degree of purity of faith, because now if there isn't one thing that's irrefutable, then there's sort of always room for questions and doubts and uncertainties. And once those slip in, the faith loses some of its power.
Yeah, right on. I think that's very, very interesting, and it's certainly been in my experience of Christianity. I think there are so many amazing things about Christianity. I love the basic concepts of Christianity, but some of the issues I got into during my Alpha course attendance it's just essentially the immortality with which certain of the words of faith are like treated. It's like, right, okay, so we've got this version of the Bible, and this is 100% how the doctrine should be laid out, how it should be seen. Yeah, right. Over the last 2,000 years.
Oh man.
And it's like nobody's questioned it, and nobody's gone, well, hang on. My thing was like, I'll give you an example would be, okay, so there was this description about Jesus's life, 1,700 years ago. And even though we've all been exposed to these alternate versions that exist in ancient scriptures, but okay, so you're telling me that this document was written 1,700 years ago, 1,500 years ago, it's identical. And 1,200 years ago, it's identical. 500 years ago, it's identical. And yet, having spent 30 years as a journalist, I know that if you ask anybody about John F. Kennedy, you'll get 100 different answers. And which one is the real answer? The answer is they're all real. Because he was a brilliant statesman. He was a courageous wartime leader. He was, an innovative politician. He was a serial womanizer. He was incredibly selfish. He was incredibly altruistic. The truth is, he's everything at once. So surely Christ isn't just this cipher where he's one thing. I don't buy that at all.
I love it's actually, there is such a hypocrisy in a way, or just maybe I shouldn't say that, like a blindness in Rick Joyner's Final Quest, because he meets, I don't know if it's in the vision or if it's in Final Quest, but he meets Paul, the Apostle Paul. And tell me if it's in the Final Quest and you read this part, but Paul's basically full on calls him out and says, hey man, listen, you really idolize me and that's great and everything, but I am not the be all end all. Like, people since me have been hearing from God, and they will continue to hear from God. And so like, you guys the church has got to get woke to the fact that there are still revelations coming through, and that what we said 2,000 years ago isn't the end. Like, that's not it. And you don't have the full picture. It says it right in his book, but then he carries on with like the strictest of
then he undercuts it.
To concepts that he learned from the 2,000-year-old book. And we all know that the book has been translated. We all know that. So one of my fixations recently in the last, I don't know, like 10 years has been this Hebrew word, Ruach, and it means spirit. And it's used a lot in the Bible, as you can imagine. But the root word in Ruach, and the word that can be replaced completely, exactly word for word with the Hebrew, is wind. And so if you replace the word spirit with wind in the Bible, or it talks about wind within humans, and I go, okay, what's wind within humans? That's breath, right? It's our air, it's our breath. So if you replace spirit with breath, now you have a document that fully supports New Age philosophy, right? Like, now we're talking about meditation and breathing. And then there's like a subset of the word ruach, which I think is yera'ah. I'd have to look it up again, but it basically means moon. And if you take that word and you substitute it, if you translate it with that word, now you've got an argument for astrological faith and very much sort of the yin-based female faith of Israel back in that time, which has been completely eradicated in the patriarchal version of the Bible, right? And it's like, there is just absolutely, and these are the things that, you know, eventually, I think, as you grow and mature, take you from preschool into like, okay, I've outgrown this. This tiny little box can't hold my faith anymore, and it just has to expand. It just has to make room for more.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think it's exactly right that the creative tension or the belief focused tension within Rick Joyner as he produced this book was that the push and pull of he's got these genuine clarity bombs that he's dropping. Yeah. And then he kind of undercuts them, and he can't himself pull away from that traditional, you know, system of belief that he's always been part of. The sentence that in this entire book spoke to me more than anything else was, perfect justice in the church will not be achieved overnight. Yeah, and I thought, well, that's it right there. That is everything. So that's the guy looking at the constructs within he operates and going, man, it's not perfect, and actually the system itself is corrupt, and you just can't give people this unalloyed kind of message which is unyielding and never changes. Just doesn't work like that. That's what those words said to me, and the fact that he recognized that is great. But literally that sentence comes up within the first third of the book. And as you say, he then goes on to find, you know, 1,000 different ways to deconstruct it. You know, so there's real moments of holy clarity when you're reading it. And then it's like, oh man, but you know, then it's just like listening to the same, I'm saying this because I've only heard people talk about it, I've never had this experience myself, but the same Sunday school, reductive Sunday school lectures you've always heard. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me, one of the ways that has really, when I was going through the book, I write and I put notes inside, and I'm very interactive with books. And I found myself at certain points, and I think this was actually in the call, which follows the final quest, but writing no.
Right, exactly.
And it was sort of my way of just like guarding my soul from immediately just latching back on to these childhood ideas that had actually been very dangerous for me. And, you know, I have, and we will get to, you know, all the books we're going to go through, but I think it's probably great to even not be scared to touch on them here and there leading up to it. But, you know, I have recently in the last year and a half realized that I am a workaholic. And not like in that casual fun, like, yay, I work a lot and I'm so cool because I work so hard, but like in a dangerous, damaging way. I spend my life trying to get it right and be productive in a way that is actually eating and sucking the life out of my life, you know, and in something that I've really actually had to address as a deep problem in my life. And as I was reading The Vision by Rick Joyner, there's this part in the call where he's speaking to an athlete, and he basically calls him out on his lack of discipline and basically tells him, you will never be the great athlete you were born to be until you learn to be disciplined. And that was the section in which I kept writing, no. It was like I was doing this with my soul, going, no, because I became such a terribly disciplined person.
Yeah.
And I really know that as a young person, I was so desperate for guidance. I was so hungry for wisdom and knowledge that I read those words in this book, and unconsciously I made vows. I made these vows, spiritual vows of like, I will be disciplined. I will not waste my potential. I will live, you know, I will do these things. And it was like talking about the responsibility you have to bring this faith to other people, to bring these words to other people. And again, it was like, no. Like, you know, if somebody is sleeping, it's really rude to just shake them awake and go, let that wake up. Like, no, it's not. The world is so beautifully and perfectly made. And we're all on our own perfect journey, and we're all in different places having different experiences. And it's not my responsibility to save the world. The world doesn't need saving, you know, and that space of acceptance, that space of like, we are not perfect and we are not supposed to be perfect. If we were, we would just transcend and away we'd go. We'd be spirit again. Like the whole point of this crazy exercise of the planet, I mean, the, you know, the mothership Earth, this holodeck Earth, is to play and experience all versions and all, you know, factions. And so really I had to fight against that very old entrenched, I think of the Inquisition, when I think of the idea of like, right, like this, like, die for your faith, suffer for your faith, pain is close to God, like all that stuff. It's like, no, it's not. And that is not what we were called to be and do as living beings.
I mean, it's fundamentally nonsense, which is, of course, why no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, and it's something that I think to go beyond those constraints, and I can see why those narratives are attractive to people, because it's something you touched on before. They're very simplistic, and they're nice, easy tales of good and evil, you know, wrong and right. You know, that are very easy to translate into a multitude of languages and cultures, right? And the easy translatability of them doesn't mean that you just have to spoon feed it and accept it, you know. And I think questioning it, whoever you are, whatever you're, you know, questioning that those belief systems, the way in which they're expressed more than anything else, because historically we're talking about a bunch of dudes in like sackcloth shirts who don't lead lives like the lives that a lot of us lead these days, who are laying down these strictures of how we're supposed to look at stuff. And actually, you know, belief, faith, your viewpoint upon the world constantly evolves anyway, as it does during the course of your life. And that's a metaphor for human history, right? You know, that's actually what happens throughout human history. And something that you just mentioned, actually, you did a sneak preview into your workaholic persona. And I think before we wrap up on talking about the final quest, I think it would be interesting just to list out the 4 books we're going to be talking about, in case anybody wants to skip ahead and read them. And the one we'll be talking about next week. So next week's book is Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And then we've got The Red Tent. And then we've got The Presence Process.
And then The Presence Process by Michael Brown.
And then Workaholics Anonymous Book of Recovery. So those are our 4 books, and our book next week is Conversations with God. But before we exit today's conversation, what do you, when you look back now upon the final quest and when you read it and when you came back to it, if you could boil everything we've been talking down in the last hour to just simple, what are the big takeaways, and what's the big takeaway from this book for you, looking at it now from the vantage point you're at now?
Well, there's a point in the book. Let me see if I can actually, I think I can probably find it because I dog-eared it. That for me became like, oh yeah, you know, if you just take away all of the cinematography in this book, if you take away this epic Tolkien battle, if you take away the sort of entrenched Christian doctrine or the limitations of Rick Joyner's humanness and, you know, just allowing his own worldview to come into play, and you just get to really the core of what the book is about, I think it says, true faith is the true recognition of who I am. It is nothing more and nothing less. But you must always remember, even if you abide in my presence and see me as I am, you can still fall if you turn from me to look back at yourself. And while that seems very narcissistic of God to say, where I've come to in my faith means that from 20 years old, 21 years old, where I was evangelical Christian, and this word would have been exactly true to me, to now where my faith is very different and is still equally as strong, but just takes a different shape. It's still equally as true, which is that true faith is the true recognition of who I am. And that when I am connected in, like, close my eyes, take away the face, the body, the life circumstances, the children, the job, take it all away, and I just tune in and I get connected to source, to my inner guide, to my inner divinity. That is where the true faith is. And that is where I receive my filling, my nurturing, my guidance, my wholeness. And then it's so hard to hold it there, because so quickly and so easily my mind just looks back at myself. I see myself praying. I see myself meditating. I see myself learning. I see myself grow. I see my power expanding. Whatever it is, it's so hard not to take that bird's eye perspective and look at myself, and then to do the following thing, which is so human, and judge myself.
Yeah.
Good or bad, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, this is fantastic what I'm doing right now. This is amazing. Or, oh God, I'm really bad at this. This is just really not working out for me. And that really the key in this book, the message that I think is really the distilled drop at the end, is to be able to make a daily practice for me out of coming to that source, going to that place, and trying to hold my attention there without looking back at myself, without judging myself. And that's where faith, or, you know, spiritual power or spiritual connection is at its strongest and most beautiful. And that, I think, is sort of the heart of it for me.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And what you've just said does speak to me as somebody who's come from a different place with a completely different value system. I think the whole thing of analyzing oneself in the moment, like you're almost like the narrator standing behind your own shoulder going, hey man, that's not so good, or, you know, damn man, that was brilliant, you really delivered there. You know, your own internal fourth wall audience, that can get in the way of so many things. You know, that level of like constant self-critique and constant self-reverentialism gets in the way, you know, and
it's like exasperated by social media.
1000%, yes, yeah.
Of that.
Yeah.
And while we agree on that, we probably also agree that not but, and both of them are true at the same time. If we don't learn to do that, if we don't ever look at ourselves from the outside perspective, we will never grow and evolve, because we will be so ignorant of where we are ignorant.
Yeah.
We won't have any self-awareness. And so that is like the tightrope to walk.
Yeah,
and
right on.
Right. That's where the masters of all faith, they have managed to balance that tightrope of be self-aware enough to grow and evolve and be the highest version of you.
Yeah.
But don't become so self-involved and obsessed that you are just crippled by your own positive or negative judgments of yourself, and you can't get into the flow of just being here in the present moment and living truly and fully in what is happening, good, bad, or ugly. Like, just be there in it. And that is the miracle of living. That is the miracle of being alive.
Yeah, well said. We do indeed hard agree on that, and I think that's a great way. I love the way you are paving the road towards that statement to the end. But it's so true what you're saying. I think you can't live a life without self-evaluation and self-awareness, and you can't be addicted to it and consumed by it either. And as with many things in life, what you've just said that really resonates with me, it's about the knife edge. It's like tap dancing on the blade of it all, going through the middle. And that's not easy. And it's what it is different for everybody. But it absolutely is it is a practice that reaps benefits if you can learn to be open to both things at the same time. Don't shut yourself down, be self-evaluative, but don't constantly beat yourself up at the same time. That's the key, isn't it?
Being that our theme on this one has been Christianity, I'll quote the Bible and say that, threading the eye of the needle, right? In the Bible, it says you have to thread the eye of the needle to get to heaven. And I really think that that's a beautiful metaphor for exactly what we're talking about. And I think that that's the intention of that verse, is to be a metaphor, right? And yeah.
Well said, Brains. That's a great place for us to end up, and indeed to introduce our book for the next episode for next week, which again is Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, which will be back in the next episode of Evangeline Lilly's Library of the Soul to talk about. So we'll see you then. And Brains, thank you. I will see you again then, mate. Looking forward to it already.
I'm so looking forward to it. It was a delight as always, Andrew. I love talking to you.
Yes, right back at you, mate. It's great to see you. You take care and have a lovely day wherever you are. And I will have a lovely evening wherever I am.
Wonderful.
Take care, mate. All the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Hard Agree. This episode was edited by John Horsley and Kenrick Regan, and our theme music, Golden, was written and performed for this show by Liverpool's finest band, Denio. Hard Agree is a production of the Spoilerverse and myself, Andrew Sumner.